this, we have team 1 score and team 2 score, and those are outputs. But what if we fail one of the outputs, meaning it's not a valid number? Well, it returns a false, but it also sets that value to be 0. Therefore, these two will be equal and they'll both be 0. Therefore, our output message is going to be, we do not allow ties in the application, because these aren't else ifs. These are just ifs. And they don't break afterwards. They don't return afterwards. Therefore, the last one wins. Therefore, we should do either an else if or a return right here. Now, I'm not a huge fan of returning early. I am in JavaScript, I'm not in C#. So what I will do instead is make this line into an else if. And the same for every other line. Now the evaluation is, if score 1, we forgot to take out that or, if score 1's not valid, that's the message, we skip all the rest. If score 2's not valid, that's the message, we skip all the rest. If these two are valid, but they're both 0, that's the message, and we skip the last one. If these two aren't 0, but they are valid scores, if they're a tie, that's the message, and we're done. So that should improve our logic. Let's make sure it works. Load tournament. Let's start off with invalid numbers. Score 1 value is not a valid number. All right. We'll make it a valid number, but then score 2 we will make into an invalid number. Score 2 is not a valid number. So we'll make it into a valid number, but they're both zeros. You would not enter a score for either team. All right. Finally, let's add a 2 for each value, and we do not allow ties in this application. Let's make it 2 to 1. Perfect. It works. And now in round 2, the uncanny losers are playing Sue's team. So there, our error handling worked. Note that error handling doesn't always mean putting a try-catch block in place. Sometimes it means first checking to make sure the data is valid. That too is error handling. These were errors that it caught, and if it catches the error, it stops the application before it can do any damage. So that's the kind of error handling you need to put in your applications. One where the user has input and they do something. Now, do I need to validate that this is a proper round before I check the list box? Well, no, because it's a closed system. Only valid rounds can be in here. Do I check this list box? No, because again, it's a closed system. The only thing I check for is if it's empty. And while we have to handle empty differently, it's still a valid state for our application. Typing in test in this box is not a valid state for our application. That's an error. We just captured that. But then also where you do have the opportunity to have errors, you can use your try-catch block. Now, this is a very, very simple try-catch block, although it's probably the most common, but you could catch more than one type of exception. So you could say, I know I might get this specific exception, therefore I'll catch that first, and then catch it generically if not. So one place you might want to put our try-catch blocks around, do something with, is whenever we're saving to our text files to make sure those text files exist. The same thing is true for connecting to our SQL database. If the SQL database isn't there, we should tell the user, hey, I can't talk to my database right now, and then not do anything. So that's basic error handling. I'm not going to go through every single place we should put this in the application because that would just get tedious and repetitive. And really, this is all you need. either have a try-catch block and do something with it. In this case, I'm also going to return. That's the one thing I didn't do. So if you have an exception, return. Now in this case, it didn't hurt anything because I'm just loading the matchups. But imagine what would happen if I didn't put this there and then I came back later and added more logic down here. That might be disastrous. Just like I like to have the curly braces for even one line if statements, even though I technically don't have to, I like to have the return statements in our catch block if that's what you should do, instead of just allowing it to continue on to the end, even if it is the end. That way, if you come and put logic in later, you don't have an unexpected result. So try-catch blocks are one way to handle errors. The other way to handle errors is to do some manual validation. And that's also important, and you'll need to do both. And the question may come up, where do I catch these errors? Typically, you catch the errors in the front end. And here's why. What are you going to do with the error when you catch it? You'll probably tell the user something went wrong. Well, where do you tell the user about stuff? In the user interface. Therefore, that's where most error handling goes. We allow it to bubble up through all of our class library methods until it gets to a user interface. Now, there are exceptions to that rule if you're going to catch the error and do something because it found the error. For example, maybe you have a fallback where you save to SQL all the time, but if SQL is not available, that exception gets thrown, and you change the database type to be text file. Well, that could work. So that might be a time when you'd have that in the actual class library. But for the most part, you have exception handling and validation in the front end. Now, validation also goes in the back end. Because just like we don't trust our users, the back end probably shouldn't trust the front end. Because who knows who built it? Especially if you say, well, we're going to take this and make this into an API that a web page can call. Well, now you're trusting a web page to do the right thing? I don't think so. So when people ask me, where do I put this error handling? I say, for validation, throughout the entire application. For error handling, it really depends on specifically what you're trying to catch. Don't just do blanket try catches. It's inefficient and it really hides stuff. All right, so that's all there is to error handling. I don't want to belabor this point. I just want to point out ways we could improve our application through error handling and checking user input. Welcome to Lesson 26 in the C# from Start to Finish course. My name is Tim Corey, and today we're going to create code to email our users. Remember that in our requirements, we specified that only one round could be played at a time, meaning you can't play a game from round 2 when games from round 1 have not been finished yet. That means that when we complete a round, we need to let the teams know who they're playing next. So with a little bit of logic and a little bit of code, I think we'll be all set. So let's get started. The first question we have to answer here is, where do you put this code? And we want to put it somewhere that we know it's going to be called the right number of times. We don't want to be calling this all the time and having the users get spammed. So I think the best place to put it is actually in tournament logic in the update tournament results. And here's why. In here is where we update our matches. We say, okay, this is the winner. That's, checking the winners right there. And then it's advancing the winners to the next round, and it's updating the values in the files or the database. So it's at this point that we're actually moving people to the next round. And it makes sense that if we're moving people to the next round, that we may have completed a round. So here's what I want to do. At the very start of this, before we do anything else, I want to find out what round we're in. So I'm going to say which round still has matches to be played yet, the lowest round. And so say we're in round 1, and then I go all the way through here. At the end, I'm going to check again, which round are we in? And if those two values, before and after, are the same round, I don't do anything. We haven't changed rounds. But if When I start up here, I'm in round 1. And when I come down here after everything is done, I'm in round 2. That means we've changed rounds. And I know I need to let everyone in round 2 know they have a matchup. So that's how I'm going to determine when to run this. And let's get that set up first before we actually even write the code for what to do. So I'm actually going to write a separate method here. Private static void, int. Return number. This will be the current round. I'm going to call this check current round. I'm going to pass in, that's an extension method, so I pass in tournament model, not team model. There we go. This tournament model called model. And I'm making an extension method just to make it a little bit simpler for me to use. Now notice it's private, meaning it can only be an extension method in here. Because I don't think I need to count this anywhere else. If I do at any point in the future, I have to come back and change this to public. All right, so first we need int output equals, let's start it at 1. And I'll show you why in a minute. Now I'm going to do a for each. I'm going to say for each list of matchup model, call it round in model.rounds. So for each round in my tournament model, I'm going to do this. If round.all. Now this is going to use some link here. We've done it before. It's just we haven't used all before. But I think it's pretty self-explanatory what it does. What it does, it says this returns a true or false. If all of the items match this criteria we're going to give it, then it returns a true. Otherwise, if some don't or all don't, it returns false. So rounds.all. Now previously we also used rounds.any, meaning if any of these are true, have this as true. In this case, it's all. So x.winner not equal to null. So what I'm doing here is saying, again, this returns a Boolean. I'm saying look in every single matchup inside of round. Say this is round 1 at first. And so we say, does every item have a not null winner? Meaning, every single matchup has a winner. Well, if that's the case, then the round is complete. We don't need to do anything else. We know that this round is complete because everyone has a winner. So what do I do in that case? I say output plus equals 1. So let's think through this logic of why I'm doing that. Pretend we have a 3-round tournament. Round 1, every single matchup is complete. Round 2, we still have 2 outstanding matchups. So round 1 comes in here. We say, is every winner not null? Yes. That's in round 1. So round 1, we know it's complete. So therefore, we come down here and hit this. And this says add 1 to the output. Well, output started at 1. Now it's 2. We come back through here in the next round. There are some incomplete winners, meaning they're null. So this is false, so it does not run. We go to the next iteration. The next iteration also has incomplete rounds or entries because you can't have a completed round after an uncompleted round. So round 1 and round 3 can't be complete if round 2 isn't. Therefore, we keep skipping over our subsequent rounds. We get to the very end and return output, and output equals 2, the current round. Because see, I started at 1 and said if there's no matches, if nobody has a winner yet, or no round has no incomplete winners, meaning every round needs to be played. So if we do that, we wouldn't hit this if ever. And so we return back 1. But if round 1 is complete, we say, well, it's not round 1. Let's go to the next round and try that. So that's the logic there. So the last thing we need to do is return output. And that should be all we need to do to create that extension method. So now in the update tournament results, I'm going to create an int starting round equals model.checkCurrentRound. And then at the very end, I'm going to say int ending round equals model.checkCurrentRound. I'm going to say if ending round is greater than starting round, that means that we have advanced a round. Then this is where we alert users. And that'd be where we email them. Now this is where I'm going to actually add a new class to our tracker library. It's been a bit since we've done a new class. And the reason I'm going to add a new class here, I'm going to call this email logic, is because thinking about how email works and how useful it can be for alerting users, I'm thinking maybe we want to alert users about more than just their upcoming match. And so I'm going to extract this out so I can call it in other areas of the application. I mean, think about when you first set up a tournament where you have, say, a $10 entry fee. We could, when the tournament first starts up, we could send them an email that says, hey, you've been entered in XYZ tournament. Please send us $10 by X date or whatever. And then we can also send them another email that says, oh, and by the way, you're matched up with Sue's team. We could also potentially email every team member after the tournament is complete, letting everyone know, here's who won, here's what the payouts were, whatever. And so I can see more than one place where we might want to email somebody. And in fact, when it comes right down to it, you'll probably find that you build your own library of useful tools. I've got a library, it's full of tools. And so what I do is I just bring that library in and then just call those tools. So instead of creating an email logic class every time I want to email somebody, I just call my library and say, send me an email. Send an email. And so that way you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. I mean, I have stuff for FTPing, I have stuff for email, I have stuff for connecting different servers. I have stuff for saving and loading files and converting CSVs and a whole bunch of other stuff that I don't want to do more than once. And that's why a library is really helpful for that. And this would probably be put into my personal library that I then bring in instead of putting it into the application-specific library like Tracker Library. So abstracting it to its own class allows us to get one step closer to having it into our own library. It just makes it that much easier to put it in our own library because we can just change just where it's calling, and that's it. So I'm going to say public static class. I don't need to store anything long-term in here, so I'm going to say static. Logic tends to be more on the static side versus models like for our data. That is also or always instantiated. You don't have a model that's not. Well, I should say almost always. We do have the global config, which has data in it, and that's a static class, but that's a really special case. So let's create a method called public static void send email. Now, what parts do we need to have in order to send an email? Well, we need the string from address, who's sending it. Then we need a list of string for the to address. Now I'm going to leave it just those two. I'm not going to do the CC and BCC. We could, but for this version, it's not necessary. We could make this an overload later where we add those. We need a subject, and we need a body. And I think that's about it. So now, over here, we can say email logic dot send email. Now the from, the to, the subject, and the body, those are all question marks right now. So what I'm going to do is comment that out. But that's where we're going to put it. Now we've got two places we need to do some work. Over here, we need to call this for every team, actually every team member in every team, in every matchup, in the round that's represented by ending round, which is also the current round. We also need to know who we're sending it from, and then the subject and body. So the subject we can probably hard code. The body we might actually want to fill some information in, so we'll probably create a separate private method for that. So let's start with setting up this end of it. And then we can get into how do you actually send an email? Because really, we can set all this up and have no clue how to do this and be fine. We can get everything working, and instead of actually doing the work in here, we can just log, yes, I got from a to subject and body. And our application runs, and it does what it's supposed to. The only thing we're missing is the actual send, which we can research and figure out how to do. Now we're going to see how to do it in this lesson, and I'll show you, but I just want to make sure that you know that even if you're stumped on a part, that doesn't mean you stop entirely. Do what you know. In this case, we know how to create a subject line. We know how to figure out the to address, because that's in the team members' properties. So we know that information. All we need to do is create the loop that goes through and creates those emails. Then we can come back and do the actual email itself. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to figure out, do we do the logic in here or call another method? And I think the answer here is we call another method. Because this job right here, update tournament results, it's a quarterback method. It mostly does the call somebody else and make it do something. And so we don't want to add a whole bunch of logic in here, which makes this massive. It's already pretty big. So instead, we want to create a method that does one thing. Private static void send email. Let's say alert. Alert users to new round. And we'll pass in this tournament model. Again, it's an extension method. Now the other thing we'll pass in, so you don't have to call it again, is the int current round. Now we could, instead of passing that in, we could call the check current round again. And maybe that's okay, maybe it's not. It's really up to us. And you know what? As I'm thinking about it, maybe we want to call this without doing this check. And so we say, you know what? It doesn't matter if we've already alerted them. I want to alert them again. Now, do we have that logic in place anywhere? No. Could we at some point? Maybe. So if we take this requirement out and find out the current round right in here, then we make it a little bit easier to be called. And this check current round isn't a big deal as far as time goes or processing power or anything like that. So yes, we're wasting a couple of cycles of CPU, but just a couple, not many. Next, let's extract out list of matchup model. Let's extract out the current round. Now I call this in current round, so I can't do it for both of them. Say current round number versus current round. Now I could do and I've toyed around with this. I don't like going through and looping over and over again, creating those loops. It just more a pain than anything else. And link is pretty powerful. So let's see if we can write a link statement that would do what we need. Now remember, that's a list of model. So that's where our problem is. We're kind of looping twice. But for round, we could say is model.rounds where x equals greater than x dot first dot matchup round double equals current round number. Now I put one too many close parens there, and I also have to do toList. By default, it returns an IEnumerable, I believe. And it says cannot implicitly convert type list to list. And here's the problem: it's not toList, it's first. And the reason it's first is because even though this is a list of matchup model, and my first assumption was, oh, we need to output a list. But we don't. Remember that our rounds is a list of matchup model. Therefore, one entry is all we need, because that one entry is a list of matchup model. So what's this complicated thing doing? Well, we have our list of rounds. We're saying where, so we're going to loop through each round here. And I said inside, so this would be a round, x is. So x is a round. We say the first entry in x, which would be, since x is a list of matchup model, it would be a matchup model. So the first entry in x, if that matchup round equals our current round, then grab that entire x, where x is a list of matchup model. So it grabs one round where the first matchup in that round has a round number that matches the current round number. You get that? You might have to draw it on paper or something and kind of just write down, okay, round one has 4 rounds in it, or 4 matchups in it. Round 2 has 2 matchups in it. Round 3 has 1 matchup in it. And, put values against it and just kind of visualize what this is doing. If you didn't want to go this one-liner route, which I understand, what you would do instead is do a for each loop over the rounds, for each round and rounds. And then you would do inside there if that round dot first dot matchup round equals current round number. If it is, put the whole value in current round. So it's just a for each is all it really is. So now we have the current round number, which allows me to get the current round, which is a list of matchup model. Now I need a for each. That's a matchup model matchup in current round. So these are all the matchups where it's a new round, so I have to alert all the teams and all the team members about the fact that this new matchup is set. So now I have a matchup, but inside each matchup, I have to loop through and let the team members know. So now I'm going to do another for each and say for each matchup entry model, we'll call it me, in matchup dot entries. There's 2 matchup entries per matchup. So we have, two teams facing off. So this ME represents one team's entry. So now inside here, for each team, we're going to say in ME dot, I'll skip over the first two for a minute. In the ME dot team competing dot team members. And what type is team members? It's of type list of person model. Therefore, each one would be a person model. So for each person in the team competing, so you see how this works? A matchup, we have multiple matchups in the round. So for each matchup, we have to look at the two teams competing. That's what it is. That's what this is. Inside of a specific team competing, we have to look at every team member and pull out their information, because it's only now that I can say P dot email address. But now I should have all the information I need. So let's create a new method signature, and we'll actually create it right here and then go actually create it. So we're going to say alert person to new round. So this is alert users to new round. That'd be in general. This is alert a specific person to a new round. And we're going to pass in some information. What do we need? Well, we need P dot, let's just pass in P first, because that gets us our first name, our last name, and our email address. So we have all that information bundled up. But then we also need to know what team they're on. Well, that would be me dot team competing dot team name. And that's all we need is a team name. And then we need to know who they are competing against. So that'd be the matchup. Matchup. Let me say entries. And this is another link query here, where x equals greater than x dot team competing is not equal to me dot team competing. And what does that do? Well, what that does, it says in the parent matchup, I know we have two teams competing. Therefore, get me the other team that's competing. And I'll say dot first. Let's actually do a first or default. Just in case this right here, this entry only has one team. Think bye week. So alert person to new round. And we're going to send this out and say, okay, email the user and say, you're competing, you're on this team, you're competing against this team in this round. So let's create this new private method. We can do a control dot here and say generate method. And that's kind of nice. It puts it right here. And it's private static void, which is exactly what we want. Person model P, great. String team name, great. Matchup entry model, matchup entry model. That's excellent. Okay. So it knows all the information. In fact, look at this. We said pass in this property value, which is the property name is team name. It said, well, I'm assuming what you want for a variable name or a parameter name would be team name, but the T would be lowercase because it's a parameter, which is exactly what I wanted. Since we're passing in an actual full model here, and we're doing it via link query, it couldn't be quite as intelligent, and so it said, since I don't know, I'm going to call it the same as the class name just with a lowercase first letter because, again, it's a parameter. So we can be a little clearer here. Competitor. And remember, over here in email logic, we have a send email. So we're going to say, let's create this first up here, email logic dot send email. And we need a from, which we don't have yet. We need a list of string. For our to, we need a subject and we need a body. So I'm going to say string from equals empty string for now, string to equals empty string for now, string subject equals empty string for now, and string body equals empty string for now. The only one that's actually wrong here is this needs to be a list of string, because you can send to more than one person. And I could make this method simpler by just saying only accept one, but this is how it's taken in the actual send email, so I'm going to leave it that way. So we have all of our parameters, we just need to start filling them in. Well, a subject's probably the easiest one. We could say, you have a new matchup with and I'll fill that in a minute. You can say $, and I'll say competitor dot team competing dot team name. So it's going to say you have a new matchup with the Rolling Thunder, or maybe Tim's All-Stars or something. Whatever team name is you're competing against. Now the only problem here, now I'll probably change this logic a little bit. I'm going to copy this. And let's put it back to our double quotes. I'm going to change this to be down here if competitor is not equal to null. There we go. Because if they're null, that means that you are competing against the bye week. So instead of you have a new matchup, we could say you have a bye week this round. So that's the easy one. Now let's figure out the body. That should be a little bit longer, but not really hard. And we're not going to get into a super detailed body. But let's use a string builder for this. And if you haven't used a string builder before, what its job is to concatenate strings, meaning put two strings together in a way that is efficient. And the reason why is because adding strings together is very, very inefficient. Essentially what happens is the first string and the second string you're going to add together, each of those gets allocated memory space. And then new memory space has to be allocated to take each of those values and put it in the new spot. And then the first two memory spaces are deallocated. And that's just for one addition of two strings together. Think about a string where you're adding hundreds or thousands of parts together. If every time you add a new string, you have to create a new memory space and move that combined string into the new memory space, it gets really, really memory intensive. To the point where if you're doing, say, 100,000 of these concatenations, which may seem like a lot, but think about going through a loop, especially if you're reading from a database. So you're doing, 10 concatenations for a person's address. Their first name, their last name, a new line, that's 3. Their street address 1, that's 4, and the new line is 5. The city, the state, the zip, that's 6, 7, 8, plus a space, that's 9 and 10. And now you're 10 concatenations for one address. Now, do you have 10,000 addresses in your system? If you did, it's 100,000 concatenations if you concatenate each one of them. At that point, you will see a noticeable slowdown in your system to the point where you wait for something to happen. And that's just not normal for applications. You don't sit there and wait for something to happen. It's pretty much instantaneous. So that's where String Builder comes in. Now, I'm not going to go through all of what String Builder does, but just know that String Builder is very, very efficient in how it adds strings together, to the point where you can do millions of concatenations without seeing any slowdown. So what I'm going to say is SB equals, dot append. It's a little different. You say dot append. And that'll be the first line of our body. So I will say something like, let's put H1 here. We're going to do an email text here. You don't have to, but HTML emails are pretty common, and it allows us to have a little more of a flavor to the email, a little more pop and zip. So we're going to say header first, and we'll say you have a new matchup. And that'll be it for that first line. And I'll say sb.append. And I actually want to change this to be append line. You can also, instead of append line, you could append a carriage return in here, and that would look like this. It'd just be append, and it would be environment.newline. That would be the same as doing append line if you appended this after this. So if you don't want to do append lines, you can do this. If you want to have lines in weird spots but don't want to, stop what you're doing, you can do that. It's just an option. In this case, I'm going to do append line. And let's do this. Let's do I'm not going to do a paragraph tag. I know I probably should, but sue me. I'm just going to start off with strong, which bolds something in case you didn't know. And oops, I need to put it inside quotes. So strong. And then I'm going to say competitor. And then I'm going to actually do append, not append line, because I want to have control over the fact that even though I'm doing another SB append, that this is the one that actually gets the new line at the end of it. So I do append, and let's put the end strong here too. And instead of quotes, I'm going to put competitor.teamcompeting.teamname. Now again, if we're not having a competition with someone else, we can't run this code, and so we'll actually create a separate, we'll put this in an if statement afterwards and create a separate message for them. And we'll make that a little bit simpler because it's a bye week. So, and I don't want to do append line yet. I want to do still append. SB.append line this time. And actually, that's all I'll do. I'll just have the name. I won't go any further. And then I'm going to do SB append line again. So I'm going to add a blank line, SB.append line. Have a great time. Put an exclamation point there for added emphasis. Then SB.append line. And we'll put the squiggly line and say tournament tracker. Sign the our name, our application's name. Now you could go a little more elaborate if you want. You can create a whole email in here that would be, we could have things like what tournament you're playing in, and maybe what score the last time this team played, so you'd know what's happening so far, or just a status of what happened last round, and have a whole bunch of information in there. But we're going to keep it simple because the point of this demo is not to make an awesome email. The point of the demo is to, or this application right now, is to just alert them. So let's wrap all of this in an if statement. And actually, we already have the if statement up here. So I'm just going to cut this, and I'll paste it right here. And for down here, I'm just going to say sb.append line. Enjoy your week off, or your round off. And we'll append that same signature line. So that's a really simple one. But that way we at least have something there. Okay, so we have our subject and we have our body. So we're getting close. And actually our body, we can take out the body here. We can even call this body instead if you want. Let's do that. I'll do a control dot to rename SB to body. But notice down here it still yells at me because it's a string builder. But we have a toString. And that converts a string builder over to an actual string. So 2 down, 2 to go. Let's tackle the to next. To is pretty simple. We say to.add p.email address. So we're adding the email address of the person who we're sending to. That makes sense. That does raise one question though. What if they did not give us a valid email address? We don't want to send an email to a person who doesn't have a valid email address. Therefore, at the very beginning here, before we even do any variable declarations, let's just say if p.emailaddress.length equals 0. Now, there's much more comprehensive checks for email addresses, even as simple as checking for an @ symbol and checking for a dot, because you have to have both of those. You know, so tim@IamTimCorey.com. And you can get more comprehensive if you want, but email addresses are actually really, really hard to check for and get right. Usually what happens is we have a check that gets us 99.5% of the way. For example, what about an email address that has, instead of .com at the end, if it has .blog? Well, blog is 4 characters, not 3, but that's valid. And so you can also have .co, which again is valid, but it's 2 characters. So it's hard to check for the number of characters at the end because we keep adding these weird new domains where the extension instead of .com is something else, .photos or .business or .biz or all the rest. And so checking for a valid one of those is a little more difficult without going to the internet and saying, is this a valid domain? And then the idea of how long it can be. An email address can be really long, and that's still valid. It can also have some special characters in it, which also is still valid. So you can get into that if you'd like, and what you'll end up doing is creating what's called a regular expression, or regex. And a regex allows you to pattern match on something and say, does this match the pattern or not? And that's what you probably want to do here. Just be careful, because a regex pattern match is an expensive operation. It takes a lot of cycles. And so if you do that on 100,000 records, you're going to slow down your application. Maybe not as much as string appending, I'm not sure. I haven't done a comparison test, but it will still be significant. So be careful how often you do that. If you do that going into the database, maybe don't do it when it's coming out. In my case, I'm just going to verify that it has an email address. That's all I care about. So if the email address .length equals 0, meaning there's nothing in there, then just return. I don't want to alert the user or anything else like that, because if you didn't give us your email address, you don't get an email. I don't understand why that would be confusing to anybody. They shouldn't come to you and say, well, I'm not getting the emails. Did you give me your email address? Well, of course not. Then that's why you didn't get your email. So we don't need to alert the front end or anything else like that. We just return. Now remember that this is for one person, so it'll go on to the next person. So if you have 4 members in your team and 3 of them have email addresses, you'll send out 3 emails to those 3 team members. 1 each, of course. So it just won't go out to the 4th member. So here we have a check to make sure we have an email address. We're populating the subject, the body, and the to field. The only thing we have left is this from field. Who are we sending it from? And I think at this point, we need to put this inside the app.config. That seems the best place because we may change it depending on who runs the application. So let's go to app.config. Let's add a new key. Key equals sender email. Value equals, and I'm going to give it my email address for now. It doesn't really matter because we're going to actually set up a dummy mail server. So it's going to capture all the emails and it will allow anything in. But just for this demo, we'll put this, my email address in. Now we need to get this information back out. But I've been thinking about that, and if you look here, we have 3 values now coming out of app.config. Well, why do we keep calling the app.config lookup, which granted isn't that hard, but why do you keep calling that every time we want something from the app.config? Let's put it in global config instead. So first we need an example of that code, which that's not hard. Inside text connector, the full file path, I hit F12. There's where we look up the app settings information. I'm going to copy this. I'll close those 2 out. I'll go to global config. And somewhere in here, let's put at the bottom, public static string, and let's call this app key lookup. And we'll say pass in a string key, and we'll get back the value. So we'll take this key and put it here, and we'll return this value. Now, really, I'm just wrapping somebody else's method, but I'm going to do that. I'm going to wrap it because, first of all, it's simpler for me to say all your global stuff is in global.config or global config dot. But 2, I can also add more logic later to this that says if a key is not available, here's what you do, and also maybe even log every time you call the key, or a whole bunch of other things you could possibly do. One of those could be that down the road, we don't store in app.config, but maybe in a MongoDB database. Why? Because Mongo. And so all we do is we would rewrite this method. Instead of calling the app settings, it would call MongoDB, look up that value, and return that value. We'd still pass in a string. We'd still get back a string. So all of our callers don't care. Now we're allowed to disconnect from the app.config if we choose to go a different route in the future, or even have a fallback route. Maybe we look up in the app.config. If it's not there, we look somewhere else. So there's a lot you could do here. And since it's abstracted, there's a lot we can do. If we just use this, in order to change it, we have to change everywhere we call this to be something else. So that just seems more logical to me. Therefore, now we can say from, and notice it says at from, because from is a reserved keyword. That's why it's blue. Oops. So instead of from, we're going to say from address. Those short words tend to step on toes. It's more often than not they're already used. So from equals global config dot app key lookup. And what's our key name? Our key name is sender email. And now you put that there. And now we're calling the email logic.send email with all the information we need. So to recap, we are gathering and checking to see if we need to alert the users because the round has changed. If we do, we need to pass in our method, alert users to new round. And we'll pass in the tournament model, which is called model. And what this does is it finds the current round and then says, give me all the matchups in that current round. Then loops through every matchup entry in each matchup, every person in each matchup, and alerts that person with all the other information that they're in a new matchup. So all that code, and we never actually wrote anything to actually send the email. No worries. Oops, not that one. I thought I had that in the clipboard. But let's change that as well. From address. I'll keep it the same thing. That way it's just not confusing. But that way we don't step on toes again with a reserved name. So we haven't actually written our code to send email yet, and yet 95% of what we need to do is already done. Now we just need to do the 5% that maybe is new to you. So, but doing 5%, it's a whole lot easier to look up and research and do than to get overwhelmed by, oh, I have so much to do. Just write an abstraction. You know you need this information. Do the rest of your code. Then come back to it and complete the abstraction. So the first thing we need to do is add a using statement. Using system.net.mail. Guess what? It's built in. Isn't that awesome? Now inside of our send email, we have to create a mail address. I call this from mail address equals new mail address. And here's where we can put in either a string for our address, a string for our address and a display name. Well, we didn't bring that in. Or address, display name, and encoding. We won't use an encoding. So the question is, do we want to modify the display name? And if so, we need to pull that information in. And it's at this point you should start thinking, well, wait a minute. Why are we even passing the from in if we're just pulling it from the app.config anyways? And that is a great question. And so my answer to you is, I don't know. So let's get rid of it. Oops. Before we get rid of it, let's copy this line. And now we'll not pass it in either. So now we're not even passing in the from address. We can say new mail address, and the first parameter is the actual email address, and the second one is the name. I'm going to put it right in the app.config. I'm going to say, instead of sender email, I'll say sender display name. I'll take that value, go to my app.config, oops, I pinned it accidentally, and say add key equals sender display name, value equals Tim Corey. Now it's a little bit nicer. So now we have our mail address, or from mail address, and that just establishes who this is from. And so it's obviously more than just a string of the email address because you also have the sender name. Now the question you may raise is, well, wait a minute, could I specify any from address? And the answer is sort of. Depending on your mail server provider, and you'll have to provide one, but even Gmail will allow you to send through them. So depending on your mail server provider, if you say, if my domain is iamtimcorey.com, and I say, instead of saying Tim from iamtimcorey.com, I want to send from bill@gates.net, it would probably say sent from Tim at iamtimcorey.com on behalf of bill@gates.com or .net. So it's not going to just spoof it for you. Otherwise, that would be a dangerous system. But it will allow you to specify your send email address. Now, some mail servers will reject the email if it's not coming from the address of the account. So you just have to know that and test it out and see what works for your provider. But this should work, especially in our test environment. And now we're going to set up a mail message. I'll call this mail equals new mail message. It's an instance of the mail message class. We say mail.to, and notice that it is a collection. So we can't say equals to because that won't work. We have to say .add and add each address. Now that means we have to loop through from our to. Well, here's the next question. Do we really need a list of string here and to support multiple? Now, in the future, yeah, probably. Maybe you want to send one email to everybody on the same team, so they'll all get the same email. So that's possible. But for now, let's dumb this down and say just one to address, and I can create overloads later that do multiple. In which case, we have to come back over here and change this back to a string. And this is the kind of tweaking you're going to do a little bit. And that's okay. So now I've changed it back to a string, so I'm just passing one in, which allows me to do this. I'll just add that to like so. Next, we'll have the mail.from. And that equals from mail address. Mail.subject equals subject. Mail.body equals body. Notice how simple this is getting? The last one I always do is mail.body is body HTML. So that's down here. Is body HTML. And I say true. This is where you set whether or not you're sending HTML enabled emails. And I like HTML enabled emails. There's a little more fun. So yes. So that's all we do to set up the actual mail message. And now we say SMTP client, we'll call it client, equals new SMTP client, client.send mail. And that's it. So we create the message and we say, yeah, go ahead and send that. Now you can also send asynchronous if you want to have an asynchronous operation, but I don't care to do that right now. And the other thing is, if we run this right now, it'll crash. And here's why. Where have we told it what our mail server is? Where to talk to it, what the credentials are, what port to talk to? We haven't. Now we could do that right here and say client dot, for example, port. That's the port for our mail server. But where are you going to pull that from? Well, you're probably going to say equals global config dot app key lookup and have, email port. Well, guess what? We don't have to do that because Microsoft built the system.net.mail grouping and said, yep, email is probably a big deal in applications. So They also create a spot in the app.config to put email configuration. So under system.net. Now the key with an app.config or web.config is just make sure that you're not duplicating a system or setup that's already there. So I wouldn't create a second connection strings down below. I would put my entries inside of the existing connection strings. So always check to make sure you don't already have a system.net before you add one. Inside here, we're going to say mail settings. It's also they designed this for us. We're going to say SMTP delivery method equals network. So you can pick up from IIS if you wanted to, or specify a pickup directory. Essentially what that would do is it would create the message, I believe it was a .eml file, and it would put it in a folder and say, okay, your email server can pick it up from that folder. We're not going to do that. We're actually going to send the email across the network. That's the most common thing to do. Now in here, we have to specify that network. So host. This is your email host. It's where you talk to them. Usually it's a web address. For us, we're going to send locally. And here's the other key here. Make sure that you test it locally first. Don't just blast out emails to the greater World Wide Web before you know for certain that you actually intend to send those emails as production emails. So just be careful that even if you're going to send it yourself at first, test it locally first and then send it through your network. So if you had a username and password, this is where you put that in. I don't have a username and password, so I'm going to simulate one. No, this is not my username and password. Here's your port. And if you want to enable SSL, I'm going to say false for now. And the reason I'm saying false for now is because my SSL or my SMTP client, the thing that's going to capture my emails, I don't believe it likes SSL. So I'm turning it off for now. When you actually send real email, you'll probably turn that back on because your host provider will probably say use SSL. I believe for Gmail the port is 465, and you turn SSL on, and then you get your username and password. And I'm not positive what the host is. It's something like smtp.gmail.com or something like that, or .google.com. To find out your provider, just Google SMTP and your provider name and email, and it will give you usually a pretty clear path to finding that information. Because this is actually pretty common. We're doing the same thing as what any mail client would do. So it's not something out of the realm of normal. This is normal for email providers to do. So with this all set up, the one thing I want to show you, and I'll bring it over here, this is the tool that I use. It's called Papercut. And Papercut is an amazing tool. And if you notice right down here, it's papercut.codeplex.com. That's where you can get it from. It's free. And what it allows you to do is it captures emails that come in. And when they come in, it'll populate like it would in Outlook. And you can look at the actual email, the message, even the headers, the body, the section, the raw email itself, and all the other information. That way you can diagnose, am I sending emails properly or not? So we're going to use that. And once we start this, I'll pull it up. All right, so here is our tournament dashboard. Let's create a tournament. Just we run through the entire process. We'll call this tournament emailing. Entry fee is $10. Let's add just 3 teams for now. That we can have a bye week. And we'll create the tournament. So now we have a tournament where we have first round, we have 1 unplayed match. So in this unplayed match, let's set team first place to be the winner. Now look at that. We now have 4 email in our mail client. Let's look at the first one. The first one says, Sue@stormy.net. You have a new matchup with the Uncanny Losers. Let's look at round 2 so we can see it. Sue is on team first place. So have a great time. Next is Bill@smithy.com. You have a new matchup with team first place. So Bill is on Uncanny Losers. Next is Tim@timcorey.com. I have a matchup with the Uncanny Losers because I'm on team first place. And then Sue@stormy.net, she has a matchup with Uncanny Losers. So there's our 4 emails. And so because we have more than 1 player per team, therefore we have a total of 4 players in this next round. And so each of them got a matchup alert. The one thing we didn't get, you may have noticed, is we didn't get an alert for the first round, only for the second round. So, and by the way, when I hit the X in the corner of my mail client, it didn't actually close, it just minimized, which is great. I can bring it right back up. I can also delete these messages. Okay, so this all worked, except for the fact that we're not actually emailing people when the first round happens. So all we do is we call this alert users to new round. Why isn't it firing for the first round? Well, the first round, the round we always check first, notice that it starts off with 1, and if the first round has a non-winner, then we don't do anything else. We say that we're on round 1. We never say we're on round 0, moving to round 1. So when we do the comparison, and that's up here, where we say starting round and ending round, the two are the same. It said we started in round 1, we ended in round 1. But the reality is we started from nothing, so we have to do it at least once. But we can take this alert users to new round, and we can actually call it from another location. Now here's the only problem right now. We actually call this backwards. We don't need to do this. We actually need to say model dot. And we actually put the parens because it's an extension method. We need to pass it in. Now the only problem here though is this is private. So let's change the public. And now we can take this alert users to new round, and we can go to our code behind for our create tournament form. Actually, let's go to the front of the code, the front of the form, and double click here. And that takes us right to the spot we need to be. So now after we've created the tournament, we say tm dot alert user to new round. And now, because we have this tournament model and it's fully populated, it will email on the first round. Notice before we did a check to see if the round had changed. Well, we know the round has changed, therefore we can call it directly. And that's really all there is to it. It really was much more work on the logic side to see when to send an email than it was to actually email someone. That's all the code for actually emailing besides this one line of settings, or a few lines of settings, in the app.config. That's all there is to sending an email. So it's really not that hard. Now, I did create some abstraction here because if you are a user that's viewing this on iamtimcorey.com, if you paid the fee to view this course in its entirety all up front, then we're going to add the ability to text users as well. And send a text message saying, hey, your new round with this team has started. Or you can your next matchup is this team. So we'll text that to users, but that video is after the course kind of ends. We're going to append that on for the paying customers to see how to do that as well. And that's just my thank you for, hey, thanks for paying. I really appreciate it. So that actually will be a pretty simple change because we'll put it just in the alert. So instead of just emailing, we'll also in here send them a text. All right. So that's coming up if you're a paying subscriber. If not, you might want to consider paying. Get that little bonus. There's a whole lot more bonuses besides that. But for now, that wraps up emailing, which means that our next video will be the last in a series. And this video is all about wrapping up the application. We're not quite done yet. The application works in its entirety except for one little thing. When we get to the last round and we hit score for the last matchup, we should do something, right? Because right now, nothing really happens. So we're going to do things like marking the tournament as inactive, meaning it's no longer an available tournament, and we're going to alert the users, hey, Tim won in a stunning upset. I don't know. So we'll alert them, and we'll also deal with the prize money. We haven't dealt with prizes at all yet because we haven't needed to. Now at the end, we're going to say, okay, here's the income from the tournament. So if it's percentages, we'll make sure we take care of those. And then we'll send out probably an email blast saying, Tim won the tournament. He got $100,000. Everybody else got nothing. So we'll take care of that and we'll be done. Welcome to lesson 27 in the C# from start to finish course. My name is Tim Corey, and today we're going to finish this tournament tracker. Did you ever think you'd make it? It's been a journey, but all software projects are. It gives you an appreciation for how much work goes into a complicated project, doesn't it? Now, before we get started in this lesson, I do want to assure my paying viewers that there is another lesson coming for you on texting. So it isn't technically the last video for you, but I consider it more of an upgrade rather than a continuation of this course. Anyways, let's finish strong. Now, in this video, we want to do basically one thing. We want to complete the tournament. That's the one thing we have yet to do. And so in that, we need to mark the tournament as complete. We need to determine the prize money, who gets what, if there is any. We need to send an email out to everyone saying, hey, the tournament is over and Tim is the winner. And finally, we need to close out of the tournament viewer form. So those are the four things we're going to do today, which means that we're going to do a little bit more of emailing, and we're also going to trigger what's called an event. We're going to create our own event. Now, we've done events before, behind buttons, so a button click event. But this time, we're actually going to build our own. So that's going to be fun. So let's get right to it. So I've actually started with this code right here open because I think this is where we're going to start. So we check for every round. And we check to see which round we're currently in. Well, this is a great place to check if the tournament is done. So we're going to tweak this a little bit to let us know not only is what the current round is, but also if the entire tournament is done. Because don't forget, we call this at the very end of our loop right here. Before we alert the users, right here. So we call it and say, after we've saved everything for our tournament, go ahead and check to see what the current round is now. So when we finish the last game, we know we're going to call, after we update the values, we know we're going to call this what's the ending round. And so at that point, we want to trigger this end of tournament event. Now I use event there as in a happening, not the specific C# type called event. So essentially this is going to say, hey, you're done, now do something. We're actually going to trigger it right from the check current round. So let's modify this a bit to let us know if we have completed all the rounds. Now how do we do that? Well, right now we have a little bit of an inefficient loop. Don't worry, it's not bad. It's in fact probably easier this way than writing more code. But notice that if all the winners are marked, we go to the next round. But if all the winners aren't marked, that means that's the current round. But all we do is just go to the next loop, or the next entry in the loop. So we kind of ignore the fact that we already found what the round number is, and we just go on to the next round. So instead what we're going to do is we're going to say else return output. Now what does this do for us? Well, whenever we find the round where we find one that has a winner that equals null, we return the output, which gives us the same value as before. It's just we return it earlier. But what if every round there's someone marked as a winner? If every matchup someone's marked as a winner, that means the entire tournament is complete. So if we get all the way to the end of this and say, yeah, I didn't find anybody that's not where the entry, for the matchup entry, the winner is not equal to null, or is equal to null. If I didn't find anybody, it's going to exit the for loop, never having hit this else statement. That's how we know the tournament is complete. And in this instance, what we're going to do is call a private static void called complete tournament. And I'll actually have that auto created for me. There we go. Nice and handy. So now this is where we're going to do all of the tournament complete stuff. So the first thing we need to do is we need to actually pass in this model. So let's do that. And I'm not going to make this an extension method. I'm actually going to pass it in. The difference is I don't think I'm going to call this anywhere else. There shouldn't be anywhere else in the application where I say, go ahead and complete this tournament. And I definitely don't want that to leave it hanging out there that you can complete the tournament early. So let's make this the only place that can be called, and I won't make it an extension method. Making an extension method just makes it too easy to tempt you into making it public. So let's just leave it as it is. So now we have a tournament. The first thing you do is say model dot and there should be an active in here, but there's not. So you don't have an active in our model, and that's because we only have that active inside SQL. Notice here for the tournament itself, we have a column called active, but we didn't include it in our model, which means it's not saved in our text file, and we don't pull it back out of our text file or anything else like that. So the question becomes, what do we do about that? And it's actually not that hard an answer to get. What we'll do is we'll come into our iData connection and create one. We'll call it void complete tournament model. And then we have to implement it in both the SQL connector and in the text connector. We can go find that. Complete tournament. So now right here we have a throw new not implemented exception. And our text file connector, what we could do is do the same logic we have in create tournament. Okay, just copy this, paste it in down here, take out the section about the ID and saving the rounds and adding the model. Well, I should go that line. So we still have the add model, but instead of add, I'm going to say Control J here to put my list up, scroll down to remove. So there you go. What this does is it finds all of the tournament files or tournament entries. It removes the one that matches our model. and that saves that file back, which essentially deletes our tournament. It's gone. It's done. So that takes care of the text file side. Now you may say, whoa, 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 whoa. You're deleting that? Sure, why not? It's not deleting the matchups. It's not deleting the matchup entries. It just disconnects them from their tournament file. So you could also, if you wanted to instead, just change the name of this current model, or maybe you make the tournament name start with complete and then put dash in the tournament name. And then you could have your forms filter out anything that starts with complete if you want to. That way you still have it in case you need it, because it is kind of scary deleting data. But that doesn't really matter. It's up to you what you want to do. Just put the logic here. So in this case, I said, for text files, I'm just going to delete it. Now for the SQL connector, I'm going to go to complete tournament. And here's a bit different. So I can flag this entry as having that bit flipped. So the active bit will be set to 0. Now, if we look down here for tournaments, so if we have a tournament insert, let's modify this and see what we have available to us. That sets the active to 1. Now we don't have a tournaments update, so we'll have to create one of those. New store procedure. Let's delete out all of this. And we're going to call this dbo.sp tournaments underscore, let's call this underscore complete. We're not really updating anything, we're just marking it as complete. And we'll only pass in the ID, and that's the tournament ID. Because if this only has one job to complete the tournament, then we don't need to know anything else besides the ID. We'll say update dbo.tournaments set active equals 0, where, don't forget your where clause, remember that updates can be really destructive, where ID equals at ID. And this has to be marked as an int. Forgot about that. So there we go. So now we have our store procedure. I'll run that to actually create it. And now we can paste that name in there for now. And we just need to perform a action like this. And let's grab our using statements first. And then I'll grab my insert statement, like so. I'll let's say var in front of p. And now you pass in just one value, the ID, and that will be model.id. And we'll pass it into this stored procedure. Done. So now I can complete the tournament on the SQL side. Because all it's going to say is mark that as a 0 for active. Now, why does that work on SQL side? Well, if you remember, when we have the get all tournaments in the store procedure, we say get all tournaments where active equals 1. Therefore, it's not showing up anymore in our list of tournaments. Essentially, we deleted it, at least as far as the UI is concerned. But in the database, we still have the information. And that allows us to keep things connected, which is good. All right, so moving back to where you were, we can now say, let's call the global config dot connection dot complete tournament for model. So that's our first step done. We completed the tournament. We also need to determine our prize money, though. And so we'll need to pull out our prize information. And also our total for how much money we brought in. Now we could break this off into a different method, but I'm going to put it right inside this method. I'll start with an if statement, and say if model dot, we're going to find the prizes dot count is greater than 0. Because if we have no prizes, we don't give out any money. Next, I'm going to find out how much money we brought in. So it's a decimal, because money is always in decimal. Total income equals, and here's where we need to do a loop through our people in our tournament. So model dot, we have our teams right here, dot count times, and this would be model dot entry fee. And so that takes our total number of teams multiplied by the entry fee, and that gives our total income. So now we know that. Now we need to figure out what each place gets and then who's in that place. And to do that, we first need to know who won and then who is the runner-up. So let's start with those two places. And that's the only two places we're going to do today, and I'll show you why in a minute. But for now, let's start with that. So we're going to say team model winners equals model dot rounds dot last. So last round dot first dot winner. Now that is confusing. So let's look at what it's doing. And again, this is a link expression, so if you don't want to do something this a little bit tricky, then you can go ahead and just loop through and find the last round and the first entry, which is the only entry. So last round always only has one matchup. That's a championship. And so what I said was rounds. Now don't forget, rounds is a list of matchup. So the last round in my list is a list of matchup. Now it only has one item in it, but it's still a list. So I said, give me the first in that last round, which is the only one. In that one, give me the winner, because I know that's been marked as a winner. Next, let's do the first runner-up, the loser in that championship game. Team model dot runner-up equals, and we need to grab the same thing again. So model dot rounds dot last dot first, dot, and we grab the entries dot where x equals greater than x dot team competing is not equal to winners dot first dot team competing. Okay, that's an even longer one-line statement. So let's look at this one. We know what the first part does. It gets us this is the actual matchup. So that's our championship game. And I said, you got a list of entries, right? Of course. And there's two entries in there. And that's the winner and the loser. We already know who the winner is. So since you know who the winner is, I can filter this entries list and say, give me the one where the team competing is not the winner. If there's only two teams competing and it's not the winner, it's the runner-up or the loser. So, but that where clause returns a list of matchup entry model. So I need the first one, which is only one, so it returns just the matchup entry model. But I don't need a matchup entry model, I need a team model. So I grab the team competing. And that's where I get my runner-up's value from. Now, if you wanted to, you could grab this value, which is the matchup of the winning round, and put that in a variable, and then you'd more easily get the winner and the runner-up. So you could do that if you want. It would be helpful then to grab the scores. If you want to grab a scores for the email, it's a possibility. But I'm just going to leave it as it is. And now I know what the winner got, or what the winner is, and who the runner-up is. Down here, if there's prizes, I know what the total income is if I have to do a percentage or a dollar amount. So now I'm going to capture just two variables. I'm going to call it decimal winner prize, start with 0, and decimal runner up prize. Now I'm hard coding these in as two values because I'm only going to handle two prizes. Prize for first place and a prize for second place. Now you may be thinking, now wait a minute, Tim. We've got prizes for any place you want. Yep, we do. This method isn't going to handle all those. It's going to handle the first two. And if we want, we can go back to our form and limit those. It's much easier to limit than it is to take away limits. So I'm going to handle the first two, and here's why. Who is the third place team? Now think that one through. We know who the first two places are because that's the people who played in the championship round. But third place could either be the team that lost to Team A in the championship, for the championship, or the team that lost to Team B. So the previous round had two matchups. Those two losers didn't go any further. The two winners went to the championship. So of those two losers, which one's the third place team? Which one's fourth? Do we do it based off a score? That seems reasonable. And so that's probably where I'd go, but that takes a little more of an in-depth application, thought process, method that I want to do at this point, just because that seems like it's an upgrade to our application rather than a requirement for our application to be complete, especially since I don't want to make this video any longer than we have to. So we're going to leave it at these two, but if you want to go further, they'll have to do some calculations based upon who had a better score ratio, or whatever else you want to do to determine third place. Or maybe say third place is just divided among the two losers from the previous round. And if that's the case, cool. You got to deal with fourth place now. What's that? And so, again, it's just something to think through how you line it all up. In this case, I'm just going to have these two values, and I'm going to say if, I will say model.prizes.where x equals, don't you love this, these lambda expressions and this link? It's just amazing. So x.place number equals 1. And let's actually put this in a variable instead of putting the if statement. We could put it in the variable, but they'll have to get the information again. So I will say, let's call this the prize model first place prize equals, and there's that first, I'll say Control J, first or default. Now, what first or default does is it says find the first value, but if you don't find one, then put, well, in this case, null into this prize model. If it was an int, then it would be a 0 would be the value. If it was a string, it'd be an empty string. So that's the defaults. Actually, empty string might be null. I'm not positive. Or the default might be null for a string. But you can figure those out. But for models or for any kind of class instance, the default would be null. So now we can say if first place prize is not equal to null, then we have to calculate the value. Now this does seem like a separate method. Private static void, let's make a decimal. And we'll say calculate prize payout. This prize model. Let's call it prize. And we'll pass in also total income. That way we know if it's a percentage, here's how much they get back. And here we're going to say decimal output equals 0 if prize dot amount is greater than 0. Remember, it can be either amount or it can be percentage, but not both. If prize amount is greater than 0, then output equals prize dot prize amount. Else, it must be a percentage. Output equals total income times, I'll put in parens here, prize dot prize percentage times, or I'm sorry, divided by 100. And when I do that, it yells at me. And that's not fun. And it says operator star cannot be applied to operands of type decimal and double. So I'm multiplying a decimal times a double, and it goes, yeah, no. Now I could do I believe I can do a conversion here, where I'd say, well, this is actually of type decimal, which isn't a wise idea. But you could do that. But here's a problem. This could cause some rounding issues. Now, is it going to be a big deal for us? Probably not. And this whole decimal thing, casting it, not a great idea either. So the first thing I'm going to do is change that to say convert to decimal. And now we're converting this value to a decimal. Now I didn't really explain this, but our prize percentage, say it's 50. 50 is actually not a percentage yet. It's actually 0.5 is the percentage. But we wanted to give round whole numbers to users. So they put in 50, and they actually mean 50%. So we're dividing by 100. So 50 divided by 100 is 0.5. So that gives us a percentage, but we're converting that to decimal. Now we're multiplying it by our other decimal, but that's not really the best way of multiplying decimals. Instead, we say decimal dot multiply. Total income, comma, and our percentage. That way, it actually properly multiplies the two decimals and returns a real decimal. So that's our output now. So it's either the prize amount or it is the actual percentage multiplied by the total income. Return output. Okay. So if the first place prize is not equal to null, then the winner prize equals first place prize dot calculate prize payout based off of the total income. Now we do the same thing with the second place prize. So we'll copy this logic and say second place here. And that's where place number equals 2. And again, we'll copy this logic and say if second place is not equal to null, Then second place prize dot calculate payout for total income goes into the runner-up prize. And that's one of those things where copy and paste might actually bite you. You've got to make sure that you put the correct values in each of those spots. So now we have the prize amounts, if any, and now we can move on to the next portion. And that's where we actually email everyone. So now we're going to create a really simple email body. We're not going to go crazy with this, but essentially we're going to do the same thing as we did up above. Before we go any further, this is yelling at us because we never actually returned output in a scenario where all the rounds were complete and the if was never, or the else was never called. And so in that case, we just need to return output. And actually we'll say output -1. And here's why. Because this advances to the next round, including if we're on the last round. So it'd say the last round +1. We don't want that. So we want to say, well, I understand that you're thinking that that we're not on the last, or that we're past the last round, but we're not. We're on the last round still, even though there's a winner marked. So that takes care of that. But in here for the alert new person, we set this up, and I'm actually going to copy this entirely. At least the part down here where we actually create the subject and body. Let's leave the 2 alone for now. And actually I'll grab the email logic as well. Just grab that. And I'll come down here to where we're actually completing our tournament. And we'll just mark this as saying send email to all tournament. Now again, this is probably best to go in its own method, but I'm going to put it here in line just because it's a little bit quicker and we're only doing it once. So our message, we don't have to worry about competitors being null. We can just create one message. So we can get rid of the if-else statement. Because we know who the winner is. And so we'll complete the subject line by saying in, let's say, the tournament, which would be model dot tournament name, in whatever tournament, and then we'll give the person's name, the winner's name, winner, not winner, prize. We have the winners dot team name has won. Let's put for our header, we can put we have a winner in all caps, an exclamation point. And we'll say here, let's put in a P tag this time. Congratulations, can't spell. Congratulations to our winner on a great tournament. And then down here, before we go any further, oh, and notice that even the append line, even though it was a line, it didn't actually keep those line breaks in the email. So we need to address that. Now, if we use P tags, it's not a problem because that puts our line breaks in for us. So if not, we'd have to include that environment.new line. So that was a little, not really a bug, it's more the fact that I just didn't put my P tags in my email, but that's something to keep note of. So now we have our winner and congratulations, and let's put in a new line or a break. Again, we can do environment.new line, or we can do a br/ to do the HTML break, which seems more consistent. And we can just do, we can do a pen line for all of these. It's nicer to have them in individual lines when we want to look back through them it makes a little more sense looking through the string builder. So now we want to say if we have winners, let's Control X these, but in their spot say if, and we'll say winner prize is greater than 0 or runner-up prize is greater than 0. Now in theory you could have a second place prize and no first place prize. That's kind of cruel, but you could do it. So if that's the case, what we're going to do, well, let's do this. Let's do one at a time because, like I said, you could have one with the other. In this case, we're going to say body.append line, and we'll say paragraph tag, the winner was, or let's put their actual name, and we'll do the $ in front. You can still do $sign here. So $ winners dot team name will receive. I'll put a $sign for the actual currency, and then our open curly brace and say the what's the prize amount? Winner prize. Winner prize. And let's just close our paragraph tag. We could put more. Again, this is not about the text of the email. It's more about the idea behind the email. So let's copy this and paste it and do the runner-up prize and the runner-up prize amount. So that's not runner-up prize, it's runner-up. Nope, that's not. That's runner-up. There we go. Gotta get these right. So if the runner-up prize is greater than 0, they're getting something, then we'll say runner-up.team name will receive X dollars. So that takes care of putting that in the email. And then now we need to just close it out by saying, let's do another P tag. Thanks for a great tournament, everyone. And we'll leave the exclamation point there, /P, and we'll sign it tournament tracker. So that has, we can wipe out this so it's not yelling at us. So that now has all the information we need for our body. So we have our subject and our body. What are we going to do about our who we're going to email it to? Well, we can't email it to each person without having to loop through this a number of times. So let's actually create an overload. So let's go over to our email logic, and we'll create an overload for this. We can do one of two different things. We can either just call this multiple times inside the overload, or we can do it where you pass in a list and it just fills up the two by looping through it internally. I like the idea of looping through it internally, so let's actually copy this signature, because that way you're sending out one email to a whole group of people. Right, copy the signature and change this one. And the reason we're changing this one is because I can make this one more complex and then just have this one call the more complex one. So in this case, we're going to do a list of string called to. And then instead of doing this, we're actually going to surround this. So I say surround with for each string email in to. Add the email. So it's going to loop through each one and add to our to list. But we're going to get more complicated. because I don't want to put everyone's email address in the to line. That means you get an email with, 50 people in that to line. That's just not courteous. Really, we want to put those in the BCC line. So let's pass in a BCC as well. List of string. We'll call it BCC. And BCC stands for blind carbon copy. So we'll do the same thing as up here. We'll actually copy this. I'll paste it here. For each email in BCC, we're going to say, instead of the to field, we'll come up to the BCC field and add the email. So now anybody in this list gets added here. If there's nobody in the list, no one gets added. Now up here we have as overload that is our original signature. So how do we call this one from here? Don't copy this code, paste in here with the original logic. Just don't do that. That's duplicate code. You want to not repeat yourself. Don't repeat yourself. Instead, I'm going to call send email. And if this had a return type, I would say return send email, just to pass that value right back through. So send email, and I pass in a list of string. So we could create a new list up here and then pass that in, or we could say right in line, new list of string, and then our curly braces, and say to, close curly braces. That will create a new list of string and put that as the only item in the list. So that's a nice little one-line shortcut when you just need to create a list to put one thing in it to pass it through. Next, we say subject. Actually, our BCC is next. We don't have a BCC, so we'll say new list of string empty. Or we can just say new list of string with our parens actually. And then we say subject and body. And now this method calls this method and just gives it the information in the order it expects. So we'll still do the same thing. It's just that now we have a method that does more. So now we can pass in BCC information as well. And we can pass in lists. So over here, let's create a list that we can pass in. So a list of string called BCC. These are the values we're going to BCC. These are all the email addresses of every person on every team to let them know a tournament is complete. We're going to initially set this to be a new list of string. Now we could probably write some really creative and really rather complicated link statement to get out every email address, but we're not going to do that. Instead, what we'll do is we'll say for each, and we'll start off by saying model.enter teams, and that would be the team model, and we'll call it T. And then for each, T.team members, and that's a person model P. So for each person on each team, bcc.add p.email address. Now, here's the rub. What if they don't have an email address? And that's where we'll surround this with an if statement. If p.emailaddress.length is greater than 0. Now we'll only add email addresses where this actually is a valid email address. And now we're going to pass in the BCC values. Now what should this go to? Well, no one. So we're just going to say new list of string. And the BCC value, BCC. And now we've emailed every person on every team this email. The final thing we need to do is we need to close out of our tournament. Now don't forget that when this runs, we will have Tournament Viewer open. We know we'll have it open because that's how we score that last matchup, the championship. And so we score that, we want the tournament form to close and take us back to the tournament dashboard where we can select a new tournament or just close the application. Now this is already open because this one stays open the entire time. But how do we tell this form you need to close now because you're done? Well, we could have another check in here after we hit the score button, and after we do everything, we can come back here and then check, hey, is the last round done? That's one way of doing it, but it's not the most efficient. Instead, we're going to create an event on our tournament model. So over here, if we go to tournament model, in here, we're going to create an event. Now, what is an event? Well, it's an alert system. So what happens is you have events and you have subscribers. And inside of this model, we're going to trigger the event saying something happened. Now, no one may be listening, or we may have 10 different places that are all listening. It's up to them. They have to subscribe to that event. If they do, when we hit the point in the code where we say, in this case, the tournament is complete, we're going to fire that event. We're going to say, yep, it's complete. In that case, then what will happen is it will broadcast, hey, I've run. My event has fired. If anyone is a subscriber, they will get that message and they'll run code. I find it easiest to think about a button. A button has an event called the click event. So when I click down my mouse on a button, that runs code on the button itself. And the button says, something happened. And it says, oh, you clicked on me. Therefore, it fires the button click event. If I'm listening to that button click event, I can run code. And that's where we double click on the button and it creates that method that has the event args and the object sender. That's an event listener or a subscriber. And so it's subscribed to the click event of the button. So let's make this real simple by actually showing what we're going to do. Public event handler, and I have to give it the type. Now this is the type of information I pass back. It could be a Boolean, it could be a string, it could be an int, or it could be even the entire tournament model. In this case, I'm going to pass back the tournament model. Now, do I have to? Probably not. But this way, at least I know that I'm passing that back. And then I can say on tournament complete. And I put a semicolon. So now, this event, I'm saying will fire whenever the tournament is complete. So that's it for creating the event. But now I need to create a method that fires this event. So let's create a method down here. We'll call it public void complete tournament. Now its job, as far as we care, the only thing it does is actually fire off that event. And you have to fire this event off inside this class. So we'll call this method once we know the tournament is complete. So we will say, now you could do logging here as well if you wanted to, or other stuff, but we're just going to do the invoking the event or turning it on. So you say on tournament complete. Now this is a newer feature, I believe it's a C#6 feature, where you say question mark. Now here's why. It used to be we'd have to check to see if there's any subscribers. because if there were no subscribers, we can't actually fire the event. But now we don't have to do that, kind of. We are doing it, but with this question mark, we're saying if it's available, do this. So if it's available, dot invoke. And the first thing you do is pass in the object sender, this. So the sender is whoever is actually sending this message. In this case, the tournament model. Now, I have a type of tournament model. That's a redundancy. So you know what? I don't have to do that. In which case, I could pass this in a string or a date time. Let's pass a date time in. And now, down here, I could say datetime.now. Does it matter? No, we could probably pass in a string, pass in a boolean, and say complete, whatever. Because we don't care about the event args. Now, you could create an actual event args and put that up here and send other information back through. That's cool. I don't care. I just really don't need to worry about this information. So what this does right now is if you have a subscriber, fire the event. Now we can come back over to our tournament logic, and down here we can say complete tournament by saying model.complete tournament. Done. So now that event will fire when the tournament is complete. So let's close everything else out. And let's open up the code behind for our viewer. Let's actually open the viewer up itself. That way you just double click on the score button and go right to that code. Again, this is an event, the click event. Notice the sender and the, in this case, event args E, they pass event args. We passed a date time. So we know that this is going to get called somewhere in here, but we don't care. We actually want to come up to, and I probably shouldn't have double clicked on that button. We actually want to come to our constructor, and we're going to say that we want to subscribe to the tournament model. We're going to subscribe to this, and actually let's wait and subscribe to it when it's down here to be cleaner. We're assigning it to a local variable up here, a private variable. So let's go ahead and say tournament dot, and notice down here we have the one lightning bolt. A lightning bolt means event, and the event is on tournament complete. So I'm going to double click on that and say plus equals, because you have to add your listener. And notice here it says press tab to insert. Well, yep. So now it created and scaffolded out that name of the method, tournament on tournament complete. Perfect. And I can close out of this rename. And now we can fill in what happens when the tournament is complete. Well, it's actually pretty simple. This dot close. Just close the form. That'll send us back to the dashboard. So let's try this out. So we have our tournaments. Let's look at this basketball one. I believe I have some information in here. Unplayed only. The first round is empty. The second round, we don't have matchups. So something went wrong there. No worries. We'll actually go to emailing one. Let's see what that one looks like. All right, we have nobody in the first round. We have one yet not determined for the second round. And maybe it has some bad data in here. We can check that out in a little bit. But instead, let's create a tournament and just create a really simple one. We'll create a finisher tournament. And before I go any further, I'm also going to open up my email client, Papercut, just so I have that sitting here so I can capture any emails that go out. let's create a $10 entry fee, and we'll do Sue's team, Greg's team, and Mary's team. And we'll create a prize. Let's say place number is 1. We'll say first place, and the prize amount, let's do a prize percentage and say 50%. And then we'll create another prize. We'll create a second place prize. And for this one, we'll actually create a just $10 prize amount. And say create prize. We'll create the tournament. And now we already have our 3 emails. The first one saying, enjoy your round off, because this person, MJ, gets the round off. Now there's a new matchup, Greg's team versus Greg's team, and this one versus Sue's team. So Mary's team gets the round off. So we can say that Sue wins 1-0. And now we have a new round, round 2, Mary's team versus Sue's team. We have the emails to back that up. And now we can say, you know what, let's delete these emails just so we can see the difference. And now we can say, score the last game. And now it closed out. That's great. And we have an email here. And notice it has in the BCC 3 email addresses, 1 for each person, because there's only 1 person per team in these 3 teams. We have a winner. Congratulations to our winner. Mary's team will receive $15. Sue's team will receive $10. Thanks for a great tournament, everyone. So it's completed the tournament. It's closed it out. It's marked who gets what money. And it's all set. We're done. So with that, our tournament tracker is complete. We've got everything in here. Now, do we probably still have some lingering bugs? I would imagine so. In fact, maybe it's be bad data, but we may also have a bug where we're not showing the second and third round correctly if they're already preloaded. We need to look into that. So, but that may be a bug. We may have other ones, and those only come out through testing. The way to get your application rock solid is to test it over and over, and not just with the standard stuff. Test it with weird things like having no prizes, having prizes but no entry fee, and all that kind of stuff. Try everything you possibly could and see what happens. But for us, we're going to call this application complete. I would love to see what you do with this application. Let me know. And also, if you do find bugs, let us know. And let us know what you did to fix them. That's the important thing. Because this really is a process where you learn more by doing. All right? So that wraps up the entire C# from start to finish course. Now, if you're a paid subscriber, you get one more lesson, and that's when we're going to add texting. But otherwise, we are complete. I appreciate you watching. Thanks for watching. I hope you got a lot out of it. Please let me know if you have any questions or have any issues or you want to see something else. The way I create videos is based upon user feedback. And this is a big one for user feedback. And so I create a big video series because you asked for it. So definitely let me know what you would like to see next. All right. Thanks for watching. As always, I am Tim Corey.